Does eating carbs make you gain weight? And does insulin, prevent weight loss? That's what we're gonna cover in this video, and I guarantee you're gonna be surprised by some of the things I'll say. Let's go in. What's up, everyone? This is Coach Amir from SurfingYourBody.com, and in today's video, do carbs actually make us gain weight? Do you have to be on a low-carb diet? And subsequently, because carbs raise a hormone called insulin, does insulin actually make you fat? Which you've probably heard a million times. Insulin makes us fat. Now, of course, the answer is no, it does not. No hormone does that on its own in isolation. Hormones always have a good protective role in the body. Every single hormone does that, insulin as well. Just like all other hormones. Basically, what are hormones? Those are the substances that do something in the body. They take a certain signal here and produce a result somewhere else. So they're basically just messengers that respond to what we do. In this particular case, when it comes to insulin, insulin is raised by two things. Yes, eating carbohydrates, number one. Number two, they're also raised by eating protein, which of course, as you know, all of these keto and now carnivore zealots, they think that insulin is bad because it's raised by carbs. Well, guess what? It's raised by protein too. So, if you had no carbs whatsoever, just protein on its own, it would still raise your insulin. Insulin is very easy, to kind of raise the levels of it. And by the way, what does actually insulin do? Insulin is known as the storage hormone because that is essentially what its function is to take nutrients from the bloodstream and put it in, we're gonna focus on two things, skeletal muscle and fat cells. Okay, so let's say you have eaten a meal. Now you have, the process of digestion and absorption from your stomach. These nutrients go into your bloodstream. So let's talk about the two states that are very important to understand. The first one is called the postprandial, which simply means, after a meal, period after a meal. So this is the period that's known as the anabolic state because, all of these nutrients are now being absorbed, they're in your bloodstream. So basically, the body is storing more nutrients than it's actually being, taken out of the body. Let's put it that way, right? So that is the postprandial state. Now, this is mainly the length of that, how long this period lasts, is mainly related to the size of the meal. Of course, what you eat affects it too as well, but it's size of the meal, how many calories you're actually eating per meal. And the other part of that is called the post-absorptive state, which simply means the period between these, postprandial states. So we have the, let's say a period of several hours, 1, 2, 3, 4 hours after a meal, and then we have all these periods between these, right? So let's say if you have, 2 meals a day and you digest food for 3 hours each time, then there's 6 hours of that, and the rest of the 24 hours is post-absorptive state, right? When the body's being in technically a kind of catabolic state when it comes to calories, and basically it's taking, it's using the energy, because remember, just like muscle, how do you build more muscle? Basically, you have a higher net protein breakdown and protein buildup, right? That's the two processes that are constantly happening, right? Right now, I'm sitting, talking to you, watching this video, constantly the fat and muscle in your body, the amount of fat is being broken down and new one is being stored. So these two processes, they have a certain balance, and if the amount of muscle you build is higher than the amount of muscle you break down, you gain more muscle. Same exact thing is true with body fat. If you break down and use more body fat than you actually store, you're actually losing body fat, right? Like overall, you're getting leaner and losing weight, and vice versa. Now, let's talk about the effect of insulin on both of these, muscle tissue and fat cells, okay? The whole idea where insulin is bad and insulin makes you fat came from is the actual physiological fact that when insulin is higher at a certain level of, it's elevated, it actually prevents or inhibits lipolysis, which simply means breaking down of the fat cells from fatty acids from the fat cells. Because remember, in order to actually lose body fat and lean out, you need two processes to happen. It's not just burning fat. We've got two things. First, there's a fat cell, so our body has a lot of fat cells. We have to take fatty acids outside of the cell. So that first process, taking the fatty acid out of the fat cell into the bloodstream, has to happen first. The second one is also important because you have to now, these fatty acids that are in your bloodstream, they have to go somewhere to be used as energy. If they're not, for example, two things that stimulate that first process of your fat cells releasing fatty acids, two things can do this. Number one, exercise, right? You exercise and the body's like, hey, I got to use, fat for energy, so let me release some fatty acids out of the fat cell. The other thing that can do that is calorie deficit, right? You're simply eating less than your body needs to maintain, so the body's like, I got to give out some fat. So these two processes help you release fatty acids from the fat cell into your bloodstream. And now you have to actually use it as energy, either by being a calorie deficit or doing it as, for exercise or overall activity. If, for example, you stimulate fatty acids to come out of the fat cell but don't use it as energy, so for example, you exercised, right? So this was stimulated, but you actually ate enough calories at the end of the day to be at maintenance, so you're not gaining or losing body fat. The body's like, I'm just going to take these fatty acids and put them back into the fat cell. It's called the re-esterification process. It happens a lot. Like a lot of people exercise. We know that on average, when people start exercising, and all the different studies, hundreds have been done on this, most people who start exercising but don't change their diets, meaning they, let's say, burn 200 calories a day from exercise, and they just eat 200 calories more because they're hungrier or whatever other reason, they don't lose any weight, right? So this is exactly what happens. The fatty acids come out of the fat cell, and they're in your bloodstream, and they come right back up several hours later. So no fat loss, no actual weight loss happened. Okay, let's now talk about so basically this is the answer to why your insulin is actually irrelevant. Like your insulin going up after a meal, sure, it does go after a meal, and at that point your body can't burn body fat, but this comes down. And think about this, in a hypocaloric state, when you're actually in a calorie deficit, right? The size of your meals is smaller. You're eating less than you are in maintenance, right? Or you're exercising. Any of these things will affect that postprandial state to be shorter, right? Because your meal is smaller. As we said, the size of the meal is one of the things that determines this postprandial state and how long it lasts, right? So if you have a smaller meal, because on diet you're eating smaller meals, and of course you can say, but wait, if the size of the meal is key, shouldn't I just have one meal versus three? Well, no, it actually does not matter, because if you have one meal versus three, it's just a larger meal. So again, this postprandial state is going to be longer, right? If you have smaller but more frequent meals, yes, the postprandial state is shorter, but there's more of them. So at the end of the day, it becomes being exactly the same thing. So it's also true that we know, for more than 20 years we've known, that if you give overweight, not overweight, it doesn't matter who the subjects are, if you control their total calories and protein and make it the same, but you give them high carb, low fat versus high fat, low carb diet, they lose the exact same amount of weight. So if insulin was actually a factor here that determined this, this would never happen. You would just cut carbs and people would lose weight, versus if you give them high carb diet, they would never lose weight. We know that's not true. They absolutely lose weight because calories are king. Of course, we know that, right? So if you think about it, okay, what happens when you eat a high carb meal? Insulin goes up, yes it does, but it also goes down quickly, right? How quickly depends on the size, again, and the composition of your meal. Also, some studies have shown that it's actually better if you have a bigger, insulin spike after a meal, because it comes down and then overall insulin gets to be lower, right? But again, because insulin doesn't really matter in the big picture of things, at the end of the day, calories determine that. So all of these, by the way, studies have been done on diets where they give people a lot of carbs and keep their insulin much higher. And actually some of these studies showed that they lost more weight on a high carb diet than on a low carb diet. Actually, Kevin Hall, who is one of the probably the most respected based on his work and the quality of the work. The scientists in this field, in his lab, are considered to be one of the best in this industry. They actually did a bunch of studies and showed that, again, like most others, showed that if you control total calories and protein, high carb, low fat, high fat, low carb, it doesn't really make any difference. They lose almost the same amount of weight, but actually a slight propensity for low fat diets being better and more effective for weight loss. And one of the reasons for that is because Fats are much easier to be stored as fat. They have a higher tendency to be stored as fat. On the other hand, carbs do not. Again, against the popular opinion, carbs are actually very rarely stored as actual body fat, because this is a process. There is a process that makes this possible. It's called de novo lipogenesis. Basically, fat cells are being created completely new. Usually what happens is just your fat cells become bigger, right? But you can also create completely new fat cells, and this happens only in the case of severe overfeeding with a lot of carbs. There's actually a study from, I think, 1995, and I can link that down below if you want to check it out. They basically overfed subjects 50% over their maintenance calories, so huge surplus of calories, and one group was overfed with only carbs, the other group was overfed with only fats. Guess what happened? Because carbs don't really are not easily stored as body fat, this actually doesn't happen effectively. Only 75 to 80% of all these calories are actually stored as body fat. In the group that was overfed fats only, 95% was actually stored as body fat, meaning fats are much more likely to be stored as fat. Their, the conversion from the fats you eat in a surplus, right? This does not happen in a maintenance or deficit. In a surplus of calories, you will gain more weight if you overfeed fats versus overfeed carbs. So carbs are not bad at all. They're actually very unlikely to be stored as body fat. What actually happens is most people overfeed carbs and overfeed fats. This is the combination that's absolutely the worst, meaning, it's going to make you gain the most weight, because insulin is high from carbs, and then all of the extra fats get stored as body fat, and they're actually very easily stored as body fat, right? And this is, by the way, exactly what happens for every average adult in this modern world who is overweight. Is they're overfeeding carbs and overfeeding fats. So more often than not, we have to reduce both a little bit. It's not the carbs, it's not the insulin. This is literally like saying, oh, this hormone makes me fat. Like, really, insulin makes you fat, but isn't it maybe what you're actually eating? And, as I said, just eating protein alone, studies have shown that beef and fish actually raise insulin the same or more than some versions of rice and even pasta. And most people go, what? Really? Is that possible? Of course it is. That's exactly what happens, because insulin doesn't really matter. It's just a hormone that responds to what you try to do. It's just a storage hormone trying to store things in muscle or fat cells. And it just comes down. It's not like your insulin is, 24/7 elevated. You're still sleeping. You have periods between meals when insulin goes down and fat burning can and does occur. So guys, I hope this was helpful. Please watch that again if some of these things are maybe a little confusing. If you have any questions, also please put them in the comments below. I'd love to answer them and clear out any confusion about this. But please remember, carbs don't make you fat, fats don't make you fat. Any particular food does not make you fat. What makes us gain weight is overeating. Calories are king. If you controlled your calories and eat junk food only, but be in a deficit, you would still lose weight. It wouldn't be healthy, but it would still lose weight. On the other hand, if you overfeed, meaning this is your maintenance calories and you eat over it, it doesn't matter what you eat. It can be the healthiest food in the world. It can be just fats, just protein, just carbs, any combination thereof. Surplus of calories makes you gain weight. Insulin and carbs are not, and there's never a one singular food or food group that does it, or certainly there's no hormone that does it. Hormones just respond to what you do. Okay, hope guys that this was helpful. See you in the next video. Cheers.